This is a day of beginnings. Pentecost, the beginning of the church. I want to talk about two beginnings today. The beginning of the ministry of Jesus and the beginning of the church. Here's my take on the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. We call this passage the Beatitudes. And Jesus said these words to his students. Not just the 12, but there was a larger group of students who came with Jesus. And some of them were women. Jesus included women as his students, unlike any other rabbi in that day. And by the way, Jesus still includes women as his students and as his pastors. So this was this group of students around Jesus, and he began to teach them, and he taught them what we call the Sermon on the Mount. And I'm not going to preach on the Sermon on the Mount, you'll be glad to know, because it's a pretty long passage. But I'd like for you to go home and read it this week. It's crucial for Christians. It's Jesus telling us the way he wants us to live in this world. So please read it and think about it. It's crucial. The passage that I'm dealing with is not the whole Sermon on the Mount, but the beginning of it, the introduction to it, which we call the Beatitudes. Jesus gave these words as an introduction to this larger writing, and the Beatitudes celebrate the crowd of people who have followed Jesus into this rural area. They have followed Jesus and the disciples, the students, because they are hungry and sick and poor. And in some cases, they're homeless. All because of the system of domination and oppression that rules Judea, the Roman Empire. Jesus wants his students to know that these people who have followed them out into the rural area, these people they're caught, they're trapped in this system of domination and oppression. But they are what the Jesus movement is all about. And it's not just the people out there that he's talking about, but actually, Jesus is talking about all people. All people. Because all people, in some sense, are like these people. Some of us are so proud and worldly successful and so self-centered, we don't really realize we're like these people. But we all are, in different degrees, truly. And so Jesus calls us to celebrate them and celebrate ourselves in solidarity with them. And here's how I interpret this passage we call the Beatitudes. Celebrate the have-nots. They own the vision of God. Celebrate the brokenhearted. They will be restored. Celebrate the humble. They will inherit the land. Celebrate those who hunger for justice and thirst for mercy. They will be invited to the banquet. Celebrate the merciful. Mercy will be shown to them. Celebrate the passionately committed. God will be revealed to them. Celebrate those who build community. They will be known as God's children. Celebrate those who have not received justice and mercy. They own the vision of God. Celebrate yourself. Celebrate yourself when people slander you and curse you because of me. Throw a party and dance with abandon, for your reward from God is enormous. You know that they hated the interpreters who came before you. Celebrate. So today, I'm saying, may this be the beginning, another beginning of this celebration of the people in the world and of yourself. So that's the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Let's talk about this other beginning, which we are actually celebrating today, the beginning of the church at a time we call Pentecost. So on this Pentecost Sunday, I would like to talk to you about this other beginning, the beginning of the church. Here now I give you my interpretation of that passage in Acts. When the pilgrimage festival, which celebrates the giving of the covenant, when it arrived, the students of Jesus had gathered in a large space. Suddenly from above came a sound like a tornado, filling the place, and a vision of tongues of fire appeared above the students, and a tongue rested on each person. And they were filled with the presence of the God of love. And they began to speak in various languages as the presence of God enabled them. There were devout pilgrims, Jewish pilgrims from every nation staying in Jerusalem for the festival, which celebrates the giving of the covenant. And at this loud sound, many gathered and were amazed because they heard the students of Jesus speaking in their various languages, their various ethnic languages. And they were astonished and confused. And they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking from Galilee? How is it that we hear our own ethnic languages, Parthians, Medes, Elamites, the residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia Minor, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and Gentile proselytes, Cretans and Arabs? In our own languages, we hear them speaking about God's acts of power." All were amazed and confused. They said to one another, "What does this mean?" But some sneered, and they said, "They're drunk with new wine." But Peter, standing up with the 11, raised his voice and addressed the crowd. "People of Judea and all who are in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk, for it's only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel, God declares, in the last days, I will pour out my presence upon all people. I will pour out my presence upon all people, and your sons and your daughters shall interpret the Bible. The young will see visions, and the old will dream dreams, even upon the poor and uneducated, and on women as well as men. In those days I will pour out my presence, says God, and they will interpret the scriptures. And there will be signs in the sky and on the earth, blood and fire and trees of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and glorious day. Then everyone who calls on the name of God shall be saved. Now, there are two phrases in this passage that stand out to me: tongues of fire and trees of smoke. The phrase tongues of fire says to me that God gives us a message that creates change. And God gives that message to all people. The Roman Empire was a violent military presence in the world. The Roman Empire was enforcing and maintaining a system of domination and oppression in the world, including the world of Judea. A system of domination and oppression which enriched the small elite class and those who supported and enabled them, but which impoverished the general population. Because of this system, Judea was a place of hunger, sickness, vicious inequality, and violence. Think about the many crucifixions that took place. Regularly, they took place in this land. The issue of this text is how God is calling people to change these unrighteous realities. God is calling us to change these unrighteous realities. How is God empowering people to build a just world? A world without war. A world that is defined by love. How is God empowering us to change the world? The tongues of fire have fallen on any movement which speaks the truth of love in the world today. Any movement, not just the church. The presence of God falls on all people, not just on the people who have the right doctrines, or not just on the people who have the right rituals, and not just on the people who have acceptable educational accomplishments or enough wealth. The presence of God falls on all people. That's what it says. Not all people receive the presence of God, as we can clearly see in the world. Anyone in the world can receive the presence of God. and be a voice empowered by the presence of God, a voice working with others to change the world. Anyone can be a speaking participant in the movement to change the world. Anyone. Change the world to a society of justice, to a society defined by love. This is now possible to all people. That's what Pentecost is telling us. It's possible for you, for everyone in this room. It's possible for me to receive the tongues of fire. It's possible for anyone who will receive the presence of God. I heard a sermon some time ago entitled, "Jesus Has Left the Building." This was someone who was very discouraged with the church. And so the sermon was, Jesus has left the building. I was thinking recently, where is Jesus today? Where can I go to find Jesus today? I believe Jesus is with us, and I hope we all will receive the presence of Jesus and trust the presence of Jesus. And we'd be much better off if we do trust the presence of Jesus. But I also think that Jesus is with others, like the college pro-Palestinian protesters. I believe Jesus is there. These young people are sacrificing so much in their lives in empathy with people who are being murdered, with so many children, empathy with so many children who are suffering and dying with such disregard for their humanity, with such disregard for their promise of a future, and suffering so much cruelty. What tells us where Jesus is? Not doctrine, not rituals, not financial and organizational success. Jesus is with a movement empowered by the presence of God to change the world. That's where Jesus is. May we be such a movement. May we, this church, be such a movement. When the church is such a movement, then Jesus is with the church. Then God's power is in the church. The Brazilian theologian Leonardo Boff said it well. Here's a quote. "The shame of the church is that she has not set out to win the world to you will love your neighbor as yourself." I assume you have figured out that the world needs change. This is where the second phrase comes in, trees of smoke. Go back and read the book of Joel. Joel uses the metaphor of a locust plague to define what happens when a malicious army invades a land. I would say that the leaders of the government of Israel need to read Joel carefully. I would also say that Putin and the Russian leaders and the Russian Orthodox Church leaders need to read Joel carefully. Our leaders need to read Joel carefully. The leaders of the Christian churches in the USA need to read Joel carefully. Joel describes what happens when nations acting destructively in the world, when nations work to conquer and destroy their neighbors instead of loving their neighbors. Joel describes such actions as blood and fire and trees of smoke. This is literally what the text says, the text in Joel. Trees of smoke, not smoky mist, but trees of smoke. Now think about that image. We have seen many trees of smoke on television recently. Trees of smoke in the time of Joel were villages that were set on fire. And as the smoke from the houses rose up into the air, they spread out at the top and looked like trees of smoke. And these trees of smoke have continued down through the centuries and now come into our living rooms through our televisions. And these trees of smoke are not just houses in villages anymore. These trees of smoke are hospitals and schools and places of worship. The most ominous and destructive trees of smoke were in 1945 over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. One can say of these two phrases, tongues of fire and trees of smoke, one can say that God calls us to receive tongues of fire to bring an end to trees of smoke. Words replacing violence. Conversation replacing war. Today, I hope that we will have a new beginning, a Pentecost. I hope that all of us will receive the presence of God, that we will receive these tongues of fire, not just me, the preacher, but all of us receive these tongues of fire from God, that together let us be tongues of fire movement to put an end to the trees of smoke in the world. If we do receive these tongues of fire and become a tongues of fire movement, Jesus will empower us. Jesus is alive and among us. And when we walk with Jesus, we will be empowered by Jesus. When Jesus spoke the Beatitudes, he was preparing the people for Pentecost. Jesus was telling them to get ready to change the world. To change the world with tongues of fire. It is not the emperors in the situation rooms in Washington and Moscow and Tel Aviv who will stop the trees of smoke. It is not the generals in the pentagons in the world who will stop the trees of smoke. It is not the wizards of Wall Street in their trading rooms or floors who will stop the trees of smoke. No, it is the have-nots. It is the brokenhearted. It is the humble. It is those who hunger for justice and thirst for mercy. It is the merciful. It is the passionately committed. It is those who build community. It is those who have not received justice and mercy. It is you and me with them in solidarity. When we receive the presence of God, the presence of Jesus, and when we receive the tongues of fire that God pours out on all of us, we will transform the world. We will transform trees of smoke into trees of life. In Gaza, in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Myanmar, in Haiti, in Woburn. Yes, we will plant trees of life right here in the USA. So let us celebrate. Let us celebrate. Let us celebrate. There is so much hope. Good hope. Shall we pray? Help us, God. We get discouraged when we see things that are discouraging in the world. But we trust in your presence and your help. So help us to be courageous and receive the tongues of fire, every one of us, whoever we are. Help us to receive these tongues of fire, and through words and conversation, through love, change the world from trees of smoke to trees of life through Jesus. Amen.